All right, everyone. This week just crossed the line that none of us expected to see in our lifetimes, I'm sure. Seven of Europe's major powers just did something we've never seen before. The heavyweights came together and told the United States to back off of Greenland. Yes, that United States, our supposed closest ally and NATO partner. And by the end of this episode, you're going to see why this Greenland fight isn't just about one island. It's about whether NATO survives and whether Canada's own sovereignty is safe.
But before we get into it, can we just take a minute to appreciate just how completely absurd all of this is? Trump is out here talking about taking Greenland. We need it. But the United States already had everything it needed from Greenland: access, cooperation, military presence, resources, the whole package. It's called an ally. It's called being a partner. It's called NATO. They did not need to seize anything.
So true. If the US wanted more access to minerals, Arctic routes, joint security, missile warning systems, all of it, they already had it. All they ever had to do was cooperate. Denmark wasn't blocking them. Canada wasn't blocking them. We were all on the same side.
Which means if Trump now thinks the solution is force, something drastically changed. And we all know what that is: Russia. The man can't stop chasing Putin's approval. Every time Moscow whispers, Trump jumps.
It's the only thing that makes sense, right? Because no US president with two brain cells to rub together would threaten a NATO ally for territory they already had access to, unless they're mirroring someone else's behavior, someone who invades their neighbors and calls it historic reunification.
So here we are. Not because the world suddenly turned upside down, but because Donald Trump walked away from decades of diplomacy and started mimicking the strongman that he admires most.
And that's how we ended up with Europe telling Washington to back off of Greenland, a sentence that nobody anywhere thought that they'd hear in 2026.
Meanwhile, our Prime Minister Mark Carney, he didn't just sit quietly in Paris either. He showed up with purpose. At the Coalition of the Willing Summit, he met with Denmark's Prime Minister and co-signed key security commitments on Ukraine. He made it clear that Greenland's future belongs to Denmark and its people and Greenland, and affirmed that this security is a NATO issue, not something Washington gets to decide unilaterally.
And then he announced something pretty significant that didn't get nearly enough attention here at home. Canada's opening a consulate in Greenland. And guess who we're sending in February? Our Governor General, Mary Simon.
And that matters a lot because she's a Nook. She grew up in the Arctic and she understands the land, the culture, the politics, and the rhythm of Northern life. She's not just showing up with a handshake and a photo op with no information. She speaks the language of the North in a way very few leaders ever could.
Greenland isn't just a geopolitical asset. It's a culture, a people, a history. So when Mary Simon lands in Nuuk, Greenlanders aren't meeting a stranger. They're meeting someone who has lived the realities of Arctic communities, Inuit identity, and the fight for sovereignty in a world where powerful nations tend to forget that Northern people aren't props in the fight for resources.
And here's something Canadians don't give themselves enough credit for. We've all been holding this line for a year. Every time he floated the idea of taking our territory or treating us like an extension of his real estate portfolio, Canadians pushed back. We were steady and we were deliberate with our resistance.
And for months, it felt like we were the only ones saying, no, this is not normal. Everyone else tiptoed around it, hoping that it would pass. But this week, something shifted. For the first time, we're seeing the rest of the world call it out publicly. Europe's pushing back, the Nordics are pushing back, the statements are sharper, the tone is firmer, and people aren't shrugging anymore.
It's like Canada's been the goalie taking slap shots for a year, and suddenly the entire team has skated out from the bench. And honestly, it feels good. We've been standing here with our elbows up, taking the hits for a year, and it's a relief to finally see other countries plant their feet and say, enough!
So, here we are. The map hasn't changed yet, but the rules certainly have.
And here's where the whole thing veers from dangerous to downright surreal. Europe is linking arms, Canada's strengthening the Arctic, Allies are coordinating responses, and meanwhile, the United States is behaving like a country that no longer recognizes the difference between leadership and intimidation.
And if you want proof, you don't need to look any further than Stephen Miller's appearance on CNN because, oh God, it was awful. Jake Tapper asked him if military action against Greenland was off the table, and Miller responded like he was, talking about picking up a sandwich. He brushed off the question completely.
And then he pushed it even further. He started questioning whether Denmark even has a right to Greenland, as if centuries of history, culture, and democratic choice don't matter. He practically asked, what right do they have to it? It was astonishing.
He literally said the world is governed by force. Just straight up, no subtlety, no respect for international law. He said it's all about who's stronger. If this really is how they think the world works, then what stops us from pointing at the Virgin Islands or Guam and saying, all right then, those are ours now?
I wouldn't mind some warm places to vacation, though, so maybe we should think about that. But anyway, Denmark didn't mince words. Their prime minister said if the US uses military force against Greenland, that's the end of NATO. Because obviously, NATO can't function if one member starts picking off the territory of another member like it's a garage sale.
And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. That wouldn't be the end of unity. It would be the beginning of something else. Because the countries that actually still believe in international law and mutual defense, they're not just going to shrug and go home. They tighten their cooperation through the coalition of the willing, the same group that Carney is already helping to lead.
Exactly, Dave. The alliance wouldn't disappear, it would reshape. The countries that still believe in shared security would link arms even more firmly, because once a major power abandons the rules, everyone else has a reason to stand closer together.
And that's what we're seeing already. Europe stepping up, the Nordics stepping up, Canada stepping up. They know that trust is the real shield here, and they're not waiting for NATO paperwork to catch up. They're actually preparing together now.
And besides, who wants to be allies with Trump? Half of his country hates him too. He's steering the United States straight toward the side of the authoritarian powers that they have spent decades fighting. He's not drifting there by accident, everyone. He is choosing it.
And that's why this Greenland situation feels so unsettling. Because when you look at the countries that Trump's aligning himself with, Russia, North Korea, a handful of Gulf states that operate on wealth and loyalty instead of rights, it's not subtle at all. He's gravitating towards leaders who rule through constant fear, not consent.
And here's the part that Canadians understand better than most because we are a well-educated, well-traveled country. Many of us have been to the places where regular people don't get a say, where rights don't exist unless you're wealthy or connected, where criticizing the government comes with serious consequences.
It's true. We've seen it firsthand. In Russia, in the UAE, in countries where democracy is a stage prop and the real power sits behind closed doors. It's not efficient. It's not strong leadership. It's control. And it comes at the cost of ordinary people's freedom.
So when Trump starts talking like force is the only law that matters, or that sovereignty is optional, or that the United States should simply take whatever it wants, that is not American leadership. That's the language of the very regimes America used to warn the whole world about.
And that's why countries are reacting the way that they are. Europe isn't panicking, they're recognizing the pattern. Because once a major democracy starts echoing the moves of authoritarian states, every nation that believes in rights, law, and consent has a responsibility to push back, which is exactly what's happening right now. And honestly, it's long overdue.
So when Denmark says that would be the end of NATO, they don't mean the end of collective defense full stop. They mean the end of pretending that a leader who breaks the rules is still a reliable partner.
And honestly, that's the moment that alliances usually get stronger, not weaker, because the dead weight falls away and the countries committed to do the real work. France, Germany, Poland, all of the big players are literally coordinating how to respond if the US makes a move on Greenland. Now, just think about that. NATO allies drawing up a response plan for another NATO ally. That alone tells you how far off the rails that Trump has gone.
And Europe isn't buying the story that Greenland is some lawless frontier either. Trump keeps insisting Russian and Chinese ships are prowling around the island. We've been there. I never saw any. And Denmark, they immediately shut that down too. They said it's simply not true, and the vessel tracking data backs that up. Nothing, not a single ship from either country near Greenland.
So Europe's looking at this and seeing a familiar pattern, right? Trump invents a threat, claims only he can solve it, then points to the nearest country with resources that he actually wants. It's the same script that he used in Venezuela, except this time he's targeting a NATO territory. And that's why Europe is coordinating instead of reacting. They're not waiting for the crisis to hit, they're already in motion. Because if Trump thinks he's dealing with 7 countries that will panic and freeze, he's definitely misread the room. Europe isn't scattered, they're acting as one bloc. And Canada, we're right there with them.
Now, here's the tough truth that Europe and Canada are staring at. The United States has more military spending than all of NATO combined. And unfortunately, if Trump decides he wants Greenland, we can't do a lot to stop him militarily. They know it, he knows it, and Miller's saying it really loud on TV.
But here's what that doesn't mean. It doesn't mean Europe folds. It doesn't mean Canada folds. And it sure doesn't mean Trump gets to walk into the Arctic and grab whatever he wants. There's a difference between military strength and legitimacy. You can win battles and still lose the world you have to live in afterward. And here's something we haven't talked about yet. We definitely want to touch on this. While Europe is coordinating and Canada is strengthening Arctic ties, there's another group the world needs to pay attention to: the resistance inside the United States itself.
Because let's be honest, not every American is following Trump down this road. Far from it. There's an entire side of American politics, governors, senators, representatives, who absolutely want nothing to do with him or with him annexing territories and copying authoritarian states.
Yep, people like Gavin Newsom, AOC, Bernie Sanders, Letitia James, Cory Booker, they've all been clear in one way or another. The United States needs to move towards democracy, fairness, and rights, not towards the kind of strongman politics Trump is so desperate to imitate.
And remember those lawmakers who put out a video reminding the U.S. troops that they are required to refuse illegal orders? Well, Trump went after them, but they haven't backed down. People like Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, Jason Crow, they're still fighting this inside the system.
And if there's going to be a pressure point that actually stops Trump's worst impulses, it's not going to come from Canadian outrage or European statements alone. It's going to come from inside America.
From the millions of Americans who can see exactly what's happening and want their country back on the side of democracy, not standing shoulder to shoulder with the world's worst authoritarians.
These leaders aren't just critics, they're organizers. They understand turnout, they understand messaging, they understand how to mobilize the part of America that Trump hopes will stay quiet. And they're already pushing back hard on his foreign policy choices, especially the ones that put allies in danger.
So, yep, Europe is stepping up, Canada is stepping up, but the final push is going to come from the American resistance, the governors, the senators, the representatives, and the people who aren't willing to let the U.S. drift into something unrecognizable.
And that's really important for Greenland, for Denmark, for Canada, for Ukraine, for everyone watching this moment unfold right now. Trump doesn't speak for every American, and the people who oppose him aren't powerless. They're growing louder and louder by the day.
But before we go, we need to talk about the Canadian angle because I know a lot of Canadians are worried. But we have to remember, Canada is not Venezuela. Canada isn't isolated. Canada isn't a failed or bankrupt state. Our alliances are strong, our diplomacy is active, our resources give us leverage, and Carney's taking the Arctic seriously in a way that we haven't seen in decades.
No, Trump can talk big on TV, but taking on Canada isn't like snatching a weak state with no allies. It comes with consequences he hasn't even begun to consider. Will he use Venezuela as economic warfare against Canada? You bet he will. But Carney has already started shoring up allies elsewhere.
So we're in a moment where the world is being forced to admit something uncomfortable. The United States under the Trump regime is unpredictable, but unpredictability doesn't guarantee success. it creates resistance.
Sometimes they wake up the entire neighborhood, which is what's happening right now.
So is this hopeless? Not even close, but it is very serious, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anybody.
So let us know below because we want to hear from you. Should Canada go even further publicly, or is the smart move to keep strengthening our position quietly while Europe handles the megaphone?
Either way, stay alert and stay informed, and do so by subscribing and clicking on that bell so you get notifications, because we watch and read the news so you don't have to.
And if you want to support this channel, please consider joining the A Team, our YouTube membership. It really helps us keep this channel independent and keeps us going. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.